Hello friends, I'm Konrad and welcome to Bad Guy Breakdowns, the series where we look at the most iconic villains to grace the silver screen. I hope you brought coats with you because it's about to get cold. Settle down by the fire, grab some ice cream and let's take a look together at Jack Torrance, the caretaker of the Overlook Hotel. Let's get into the villainy. Jack Torrance is introduced driving along an increasingly isolated road in the Rocky Mountains as an adaptation of Dies Irae, a 13th century Gregorian chant whose title translates to Day of Wrath, sure there's nothing ominous about that, plays in the background. Already it's obvious that this is a dangerous place, far from civilization. Jack is here alone on a job interview while his family wait back in Denver. The job, off-season caretaker of the Overlook Hotel, is not physically demanding, but the solitude...
The only thing that can get a bit trying up here during the winter is the tremendous sense of isolation.
Yeah, I was just saying that. Thanks, Stuart. Jack confidently assures the general manager of the Overlook that his family will love it, even after it is revealed to him that a former caretaker by the name of Charles Grady went mad and murdered his family in the winter of 1970. Jack Nicholson plays Torrance's reaction to this story as momentarily pensive, almost as if striking some kind of long-forgotten chord with the character before dismissing it.
Well, you can rest assured, Mr. Ullman, that's not going to happen with me.
I have no reason to doubt this. He plays off his momentary concern with humour and diverts attention to his wife, who he claims is a ghost story and horror film addict. She sounds cool, sure hope nothing bad happens to her. And honestly, her son talking to a random ghost called Tony, something we briefly see in this introduction, is probably down to her letting him watch horror movies with her. That stuff is corrupting our kids. We catch up with the Torrance clan as Jack drives his wife Wendy and son Danny back up to the hotel in a car journey that ranks among the most awkward I've ever seen in a film. Look at Jack Nicholson's face here. The day has only just begun and he is already absolutely done with Danny's shit. Although his little eyes do perk up when he gets to tell his son about the Donner Party resorting to cannibalism after getting snowbound in the mountains, something Wendy thinks might be a little adult for him.
Dad, don't worry, Mom. I know all about cannibalism. I saw it on TV.
This is your fault, Wendy. You let the kid watch all those Lon Chaney movies and now here we are. This is such a great example of the kind of mundane tension that is already simmering beneath the surface of this marriage. Wendy somehow getting blamed for Jack deciding to talk about cannibalism with their young son. And although we don't know it yet, it'll soon become clear why. Jack has his demons before he ever gets to the Overlook and things are only going to get worse from here. While Jack and Wendy are shown around, Danny plays darts in the games room with form that could charitably be described as jittery before making friends with a pair of well-dressed twin sisters. They seem fine right now, but we'll see them again. Meanwhile, the tour has progressed from the spacious Colorado lounge to the family apartment in the hotel to a brief history lesson as they walk around the grounds.
The site is supposed to be located on an Indian burial ground, and I believe they actually had to repel a few Indian attacks as they were building it.
Never in the history of horror movies has building something on a burial ground of any kind gone well, so good job there, guys. Danny describes the Overlook as the best place he has ever seen to the chef, Dick Halloran, who is way too nice a guy to survive a movie like this. Wendy notices that Halloran has started calling Danny by his nickname Doc without any way of knowing that that's what they call him. And he sort of brushes it off, which is totally fine, and that high-pitched whistling noise that is starting to penetrate the score is probably nothing.
How'd you like some ice cream, Doc?
Ah! Alright, okay, well, Dick Halloran is a psychic then, I guess. Hopefully the movie comes up with a name for that power before the end.
You've got the shinin'.
You mean shining?
Shh, you wanna get sued?
Yep, turns out Danny and Halloran have a lot in common. A love of ice cream, their mothers, and communicating telepathically across time and space. Most crucially though, and the way in which this conversation relates back to Jack, is Halloran's assertion that when something bad happens it leaves behind a trace of itself, like burned toast. And it's a trace only people who shine can see. That's worth repeating. Those who shine are most susceptible to these forces like the evil of Overlook. And it leads us to one of the biggest questions of the movie. Can Jack shine? And I'm going to say right now that the answer at the end of this video is almost certainly going to be inconclusive. There just isn't enough evidence to say for sure, but it's a fascinating aspect of his character to explore. We see how isolated The Shining makes Danny throughout this movie. So when we view Jack's alcoholism and violent outbursts through the lens of someone who experiences the same kinds of visions, albeit more rarely due to suppressing them, it deepens the character. He isn't just an angry, frustrated alcoholic, he's perhaps someone who has turned to alcohol to try and escape The Shining, from the greater sense of holistic empathy that it grants him. Jack is both a cautionary glimpse into Danny's potential future and a tragic figure in his own right, as we shall find out. For the time being, just keep an eye out for moments where Danny has a Shining related experience and then Jack has an almost identical one, or vice versa. There are parallels running throughout this movie. Oh, and Room 237 is definitely a shit show. Don't go in there. Thanks for the heads up, Dick. We catch up with the gang a month into their stay at the Overlook and things are relatively peaceful. Danny spends his days riding a kick-ass tricycle around the place with Stanley Kubrick and a camera crew behind him, setting up one of the best scares of the whole movie a little later. But more than that, it really draws attention to a style of camera movement that Kubrick has been using a lot in The Shining, and will continue to use over and over again, and that's tracking shots. Shots where the camera moves along a plane with an actor or object, normally sideways, though not always. His Steadicam shot following Danny on his tricycle is probably the most famous example from this movie, indeed probably one of the most famous shots of its type ever, but they are everywhere if you look for them. Watch how the camera moves with the Torrance family here, or here, or with Shelley Duvall here, or with Wendy, Danny and Dick Halloran here. The camera is constantly in motion, like something is watching these people and moving with them as they navigate the hotel. It gives the incredibly creepy sensation that they aren't alone, and justifiably so, because they're not. It's actually quite hard to find examples of static shots in The Shining, outside of the occasional shot reverse shot setup of dialogue scenes, and this is absolutely deliberate on Kubrick's part. His camera use is ominous and disconcerting. Every time you see a tracking shot in The Shining, he wants you to be thinking, what exactly is following? Jack appears to be making a habit of sleeping in until 11:30 and then passive-aggressively snapping at Wendy after she brings him breakfast in bed, and offers encouragement about his writing, which has, thus far, not really gotten off the ground.
Something will come. It's just a matter of settling back into the habit of writing every day.
Yeah, that's all it is.
And look, I get it, a blank page is intimidating as hell, Jack, but she's just trying to help, and hurling a baseball against that wall is definitely going to damage it. Wendy and Danny go for a walk in the Overlook Maze, a location they'll return to when things get dire, while inside Jack surveys a model of it. The cut from his top-down view of the model to a wonderful aerial shot of Wendy and Danny actually in the maze, perfectly encapsulating both the power dynamic of their relationship and of their role in the hotel. These two are diminutive, insignificant annoyances, and Jack, though he may not know it yet, is already very much on the side of the Overlook. The hotel slowly seeking to influence Jack through his own self-loathing, projected outwards onto his family. A few days later, and Danny is back on the trike, and makes the wise choice to not go into room 237 while Jack and Wendy have another disagreement about her influence on his work. I say disagreement, but in reality it's just him being a cog. Wendy makes small talk about the weather before Jack snaps and tells her to never disturb him in the room again.
Why don't you start right now and get the fuck out of here?
Whoa! Time out, Buster! Man, Shelley Duvall is just the most sympathetic character in this, both because of how she plays the part and, unfortunately, how she was treated by Kubrick on the set. There's so much pathos in her face here. A little later, Wendy and Danny play outside while we are treated to one of Kubrick's trademark, agonisingly slow zoom on a psychopath's face shots. Jack? Jack, you okay, buddy? Alright, let's just leave him there for a while. He'll snap out of it. It's Saturday, and that means it's time for the Torrance family to kick their feet up, play some catch with the kid, and relax. Unless you're Wendy, in which case it means it's time to radio the fire department because the phone lines are down. You'll notice Wendy is the only one depicted as actually performing the job Jack was hired to do in this movie. Checking the boilers, maintaining the place, that sort of thing. This little tidbit of information will become relevant when Jack begins to berate Wendy for putting his job at risk later, revealing that he's totally full of shit, because he never did the job in the first place. Meanwhile, Danny is back on the trike because his father is clearly neglecting him and... Ah! Oh, those twins are back. Oh, they seem nice.
Come and play with us, Danny.
Maybe not. Monday rolls around and boy howdy does Jack have a case of the blues. Danny finds him sitting aimlessly on the bed in his dressing gown, unshaved and seemingly in some kind of stupor. And, to be fair, we've all been there. Who among us, right? This is the last time Danny and Jack will have any kind of meaningful conversation with each other, and it's tragic to see how far Jack has already fallen. And the actual motivation for this scene is entirely up to viewer interpretation. Is Jack still in there somewhere, desperately trying to connect with his son but unable to get past this corrupted, zombified exterior? Or is this purely the malice of the Overlook at work, attempting to allay Danny's suspicions so that it can continue its dark work in peace without the Shining getting involved? From Danny Lloyd's performance, it's clear which side he comes down. This ain't Danny's dad. He wants it to be, he asks it questions that his dad might answer, but his eyes are filled with fear and a grim acceptance that his dad is gone. And as if to confirm this, when Danny asks if his dad would ever hurt them, Jack's first instinct is to shift to an accusatory tone regarding Wendy, as if she has somehow planted this idea in the child's head. It's such a fantastic melding of a tension in the actual relationship between Jack and Wendy and the corrosive influence of the Overlook, playing up these divisions. In the middle of the week, we meet up with Danny again as he plays by himself next to the blood-filled elevator. Honestly, not the best place for a child to sit, but in a haunted hotel your options are a little limited. Fortunately, a friendly ghost rolls him a ball from off-screen and invites him into room 237, while Wendy does Jack's job for him as the patriarch of the Torrance family has a very loud nightmare in the Colorado lounge. In the previous scene, we saw the last time Jack and Danny would share any meaningful conversation with one another, and this scene, for my money, is the last time we see Jack, full stop. As Wendy wakes him from a nightmare wherein he kills his wife and son in a manner similar to that of previous caretaker Charles Grady, Jack can only respond by weeping and lamenting that he feels like he is losing his mind. He is vulnerable, fearful of what he might do, and seemingly cognizant, if only briefly, of what is happening to him. The nightmare having stirred his consciousness back to the forefront of his mind. However, it won't last. Danny emerges into the room with bruises all over his neck, prompting Wendy to accuse Jack of hurting their child, something Jack is too confused to deny. To my mind, because he genuinely isn't sure, since his life has become one long waking nightmare at this point. It's only after his family have fled from him that he rejects the idea that he hurt Danny, finding solace with Lloyd, the bartender of the Golden Room and future CEO of the Tyrell Corporation. I love the introduction of Lloyd here, and the way Kubrick shoots Jack's descent into utter madness from this point on. He enters the room and it's clearly empty. The lights are off, there is no alcohol behind the bar, and certainly no Lloyd. Jack sits and begs for a drink, hinting at his alcoholism. He covers his eyes and the camera moves into a face-on close-up, so we, like Jack, don't see what's about to happen. Then he opens them and starts talking to the camera, and to Lloyd. And it's only after a few seconds that we get a reverse shot of the bar, now fully stocked, and the ghostly Lloyd standing in front of him, confirming that if Jack is indeed insane, then it's an insanity that we are now a part of. And cinematographer John Olcott supports this with the coverage of the conversation, initially shooting it intimately with the camera low and inside the speakers rather than an over-the-shoulder perspective. It lets us catch all of the work that Nicholson is doing with his face in great detail, and contrasts it brilliantly against the ethereal neutrality of Joe Turkel's Lloyd. And it also serves to make the audience part of the conversation, once again bringing us into the horror. This isn't something we're witnessing from afar, we're stuck here too. The only time the camera moves back is when Lloyd steps into frame to pour Jack his drink, and then the bartender acts as an object to reduce the frame, Turkel's blocking implying power over Jack with his higher stance and the smaller frame threateningly cutting off the space around the character. This is a man who is now out of options and completely at the mercy of the Overlook, and the photography in this scene completely supports it. Jack complains to Lloyd that he didn't hurt Danny, completely unaware that it was the Overlook that gave his son those bruises, before confessing that he once accidentally broke Danny's arm in anger. Once again, the hotel is playing on the tensions that already exist in this marriage. Jack's frustrations with his professional failures are heightened until every bit of interest Wendy takes in his writing is met with aggression and defensiveness. And likewise, every mention of violence towards Danny conjures memories of the guilt that Jack feels at having once hurt his son. He is ashamed of himself, and the Overlook knows how to contort this emotion. The illusion is shattered by the screams of Wendy, who appears breathless with a bat, crying that Danny has told her he was strangled by an old woman in room 237. Unbeknownst to both of them, Danny has sent up the shining signal to Dick Halloran to let him know that all is not well at the Overlook Hotel. As it turns out, the real nightmare in room 237 is the number of different patterns they've used in the decoration. That carpet and those bed sheets simply do not go, to say nothing of the mint green bathroom. Oh, and also the naked ghost lady in the tub that Jack seems a little too pleased to find. Remember back when I said look out for paranormal experiences that Danny and Jack share? Here's the big one. He's physically interacting with a manifestation of the Overlook's power here, much like Danny did. And while Wendy will also see the ghosts of the Overlook later, it's worth noting that she is never physical with them in the same way as her husband and son. We're going to have to gloss over a lot of the scene as there's nudity in it, and heaven forbid someone see a boob on the internet, YouTube. But suffice to say that Jack is all too happy to get intimate with a sexy ghost, which is pretty progressive, until she transforms into the rotten corpse of an old woman and sends him fleeing in terror, locking 237 behind him. A little later, Jack decides that this is totally normal and tells Wendy that he didn't find anything, so he's either a liar or has a far higher threshold for weird shit than me. Wendy says it'd probably be a good idea to leave.
I think we have to get Danny out of here.
Jack disagrees.
It is so fucking typical of you to create a problem like this when I finally have a chance to accomplish something.
Alright, good talk, Jack. There's a party in the Gold Room and everyone's invited. And by everyone, we mean Jack Torrance and his ghost friends. Jack is greeted by an usher who will turn up later in slightly worse condition, grabs a drink from the bartender Lloyd, which he isn't allowed to pay for.
No charge to you, Mr. Torrance.
Okay, nothing weird about that.
Orders from the house.
And then quite literally runs into a waiter. They head to the bathroom to wash the avocat out of his jacket, and holy shit, look at that room. Kubrick's eye for colour in this is really something else. The waiter reveals himself to be Delbert Grady, a name Jack has heard before.
Mr. Grady, weren't you once the caretaker here?
Why, no, sir. I don't believe so.
I hired a man named Charles Grady as the winter caretaker.
The existence of a Delbert Grady who also murdered his family in the hotel, exactly like Charles, and now serves the Overlook as a ghostly apparition is important information. The fact that Jack conflates the crimes of Charles with Delbert is neither here nor there because, and this is us getting ahead of ourselves but it's worth mentioning now, Delbert and Charles are the same person. The Overlook seemingly resurrects individuals and draws them to it over and over again so they can repeat their crimes. Delbert became Charles and Jack, well, we'll come back to Jack later. The Overlook drops the pretense and speaks to Jack frankly through Grady, telling him to correct his wife and son.
He is a very willful boy.
First stop, the manager's office where the radio lives, the last line of communication to the outside world now that the phone lines are down. Wendy navigates the Overlook alone, cautiously, stumbling across Jack's work in the Colorado lounge as first the camera, a point of view shot for something, and then Jack himself creeps out from behind a wall, with Kubrick shooting over his shoulder like the presence of the Overlook itself hangs behind him, urging him on. These two characters are almost never in the same shot as one another after the initial reveal of Jack's presence. They are now diametrically opposed, utterly separated. There's no master wide shot here. Jack rages about his future and how important adhering to his contract to the Overlook is for his reputation and standing. As we said before, bullshit. It's obviously ridiculous for a caretaker job at some hotel and is an exaggerated projection of his view of himself as a failure. The real Jack, prior to the Overlook's influence, harboured a feeling that this could be a real opportunity for him to turn his life around by establishing himself as a writer and a success. Now, with insanity packed in on top of that insecurity, it comes out like this, a nonsensical diatribe about responsibilities like he's a member of a royal court. Jack only enters the frame once he and Wendy are brought into physical conflict with one another. Look at the difference in the lighting between the two of them here. Jack's back is almost totally unlit. He exists as a dark shape that narrows the frame around Wendy, while his face becomes bathed in a demonic red light as he advances on her. Wendy, on the other hand, is shot more naturally. It's a great contrast. Still, for all the menace that he possesses, Jack isn't able to do anything but have his noggin bashed in, and gets locked in the dry food storage.
Hey, what are you doing?
Stay in there till you're no longer insane, Jack. However, he has a surprise for Wendy once his attempts at bargaining and pretending to be injured fail. He's destroyed the snowcat. Jack has made himself at home in the dry food storage, tucking into Oreos, peanut butter, nuts, and some dry cornflakes, I think. Damn, that's a lot of carbs, Jack. He seems pretty comfortable, honestly. The Overlook isn't pleased and gets Delbert Grady to let him out, though.
Look, some of the ghouls and I are a little concerned the project isn't moving forward.
Can't murder now. Eating.
Oh, for crying out loud. Come on.
Meanwhile, Dick Halloran is on his way to the Overlook. We haven't mentioned his story up until now because he's not a bad guy and we don't have time for do-gooders in this series, but it's worth pointing out that he'll be turning up soon. The final confrontation in The Shining is legendary, from dialogue to scares per minute to visual presentation to acting. It's all amazing. We'll do a thorough rundown of it in that section later, but for the moment let's just outline the basics. Jack attacks Wendy and Danny in their apartment. Danny escapes through a window and out into the hedge maze while Jack lopes off to have a quiet word with the newly arrived Dick Halloran. Wendy runs through the hotel seeing lots of scary shit. And the movie ends with Jack frozen in the maze, his traumatized family escaping, and a slow zoom on a picture in the hotel from 1921 which shows Jack in a dinner jacket, confirming that, much like Charles and Delbert Grady, Jack is also a reincarnation of a man who has been to the Overlook before, presumably committing multiple axe-related homicides along the way. And that's The Shining. It's a great movie and Jack's a great villain, and while his plan, such as it was, ultimately failed, I feel like that was as much to do with his initial reticence to brutally murder his own family as it was to do with the competency of the plan itself. Let's have a closer look at what the strategy was here. Let's be honest, Jack's plan was pretty route one. There's not very much subtlety to it. Murder family with axe. That's it. That's the steps involved. But it's really more the Overlook's plan than Jack's. When viewed from the perspective of a fundamentally evil force of nature, the plan becomes a nuanced process of playing on Torrance's fears and insecurities to make him doubt what he knows to be true, that his family love and support him, and instill in him a sense that they are holding him back and in need of discipline. In a sense, it's like a poisonous relationship. At first, Jack perceives the Overlook as a responsibility that he is proud of, a chance to make something of himself. And through his infatuation with this job and what it could mean for him, he allows the insidious forces at work in the hotel to sink their claws into him. And once they're in there ain't no getting them out. And this is all without mentioning the fact that Jack, like Grady, is revealed to have been here before. He has been offered the corrupting influence of the Overlook who knows how many times, and has succumbed to it at least twice. And based on Grady, it's a fair bet that each time he has also committed violence in the hotel to feed its own evil energy. So, while the plan may have failed this time insofar as the Torrance family got away, the Overlook did everything it needed to set Jack up for success. It just so happens that this time he was married to a particularly resourceful woman and a son with superpowers. So ultimately, it's hard to fault them. Could the Overlook have provided Jack with more muscle to get the job done? Let's next have a look at the hotel and its denizens. Let's address the elephant in the room. I've already written myself into a corner with this episode structure because the Overlook Hotel and its boy squad isn't really an associate so much as the actual main villain of this movie. But we're going to conveniently ignore that and treat the haunted hotel like a henchman because it's funnier. When it comes to evil, this place just gets it. It's not just about having spooky monsters roaming the halls. It's not just about making sure the elevators are always fully stocked with blood, although that helps. It's about picking the right man for the job and then supporting him in his murderous endeavours. This is a team sport. So many bad guys don't understand that. Yes, the Overlook gets things started with Jack by playing up the pre-existing divisions in his relationships with Wendy and Danny, but when it needs a break, it knows when it's time to delegate to its horde of willing subservients. Guys like Delbert Grady and Lloyd are key bench players who are able to come in and make an impact, either by triggering Jack's alcoholism or reaffirming his animosity towards his family by providing another example of where it has worked out fine.
I corrected them, sir.
Or, well, fine for Grady, I guess. Less so his wife and daughters. If the Overlook has a flaw, it's that it has been on top of the game too long. It's grown complacent with its success and has forgotten that it needs to at least sort of work as a functional hotel, something that brutal axe murders tend to hinder. And listen, I've stayed at some hotels which I suspect to be unliving monuments to evil before. For example, I'm 90% certain that the Hilton Clearwater Beach Resort in Florida is staffed entirely by ghosts, but even in the pantheon of awful hotels, you've got to believe that the Overlook just wouldn't survive into the era of Yelp reviews. So while it might be having its fun, sending its caretakers insane right now, it's honestly very short-sighted for an entity whose very existence relies on providing a welcoming environment for the ski crowd. And yes, I can hear the argument that the Overlook can't see the future already, but if you're telling me that this cursed site has the power to reincarnate Grady and Torrance and corrupt them to evil seemingly in perpetuity, but isn't able to predict the rise of the internet and consumer hotel reviews, I'm going to tell you that's a hotel which shouldn't be in business, haunted or not. It wouldn't be until Dr. Sleep that we actually hear conclusively about what happens to the Overlook though. At the end of The Shining, it is still very much alive. Even though Dick Halloran suggests that the ghosts of the Overlook can't physically hurt anyone, Danny getting bruised by the ghoul woman in 237 proves this wrong, and means that if push comes to shove, the Overlook probably could do some killing itself. But unfortunately, all of the violence in this movie is going to be on Jack to perform, and as a brief content warning, although there isn't much gore in The Shining, you're going to see some blood in this section, so be aware. I'm also going to cheat here because there's a pair of kills we need to talk about which, even though Jack technically didn't commit them, are the result of the Overlook's influence on someone who is essentially another version of Jack, and honestly, it'd be criminal to omit them. So while we spend most of the movie waiting for Jack to finally snap and do something with that axe, we're reminded of the nature of the violence that is coming when those friendly twins that have been hanging out with Danny appear to him one final time before flashing on screen as mutilated corpses in the hallway. Grady's handiwork, but it might as well be Jack's. And then much later, after driving, flying, driving again, then driving a different kind of vehicle, Dick Halloran comes to the rescue of Wendy and Danny, though he unwisely chooses to shout out his location as soon as he arrives and lets Jack know he's there as a result. He just barely makes it into the building before he gets an axe buried in his chest, making his entire contribution to the movie, telling Danny about his shinning, distracting Jack to save Wendy, and giving the mother and son a vehicle to escape in. Told you he was too nice to survive a movie like this. And that's the total. 3 kills split between Grady and Jack on screen for The Shining, though the implication is there that both men have killed more often than not when they're on shift in the Overlook, so to speak, so their historical numbers are probably pretty high. But really, The Shining isn't about one person doing lots of murdering, but more the building sense of dread as the haunting manifests itself, both in ghostly apparitions and in Jack's madness, and never is this better exemplified than in that final showdown between Jack and his family, where all the ghosts come out to play. Let's check it out. Wendy and Danny attempt to relax in their apartment at the Overlook. Though absent for a little while prior to this, Danny's imaginary friend Tony turns up while Wendy sleeps and gets him to grab a knife and write "Red Rum" on the bedroom door. He starts screaming the phrase over and over again in a voice that isn't at all creepy.
Red rum! Red rum! Red rum! Stop it! Red rum!
Waking Wendy, and as she hugs him, she catches sight of the writing in a mirror and realises that it sort of spells murder. Fortunately, she has very little time to process this insanity, as seconds later, Jack starts bashing the front door open with an axe, utilising those Kubrick tracking shots again, the camera moving back and forth as if the Overlook is lending its power to his strikes. Wendy sends Danny out of the bathroom window and just screams a lot, which, to be fair, I would 100% do too.
Here's Johnny!
Yep, you knew it was coming. I couldn't make a video about The Shining and not include its most iconic line now, could I? Fortunately for Wendy, Jack hears Dick Snowcat approaching over his late night talk show host impersonation and lopes off to do some good old fashioned axe murder, leaving her to escape the bathroom unhindered. Wendy runs around the Overlook seeing all of the sights: Blood Elevator, Thing in Bear costume performing fellatio, Usher from earlier now with head wound. Meanwhile, Jack runs after Danny, who leads him into the snowed out hedge maze. There's that tracking camera again, zipping after him like a bloodhound guiding Jack after the scent. Unfortunately, If the Overlook is a hunting dog, it's not a particularly good one, as Danny is able to avoid it, and Jack, by retracing his steps and hiding behind a snowdrift. Jack never heard that follow the left-hand wall thing to escape, clearly, and becomes hopelessly lost. Wendy meets back up with Danny, and the mother and son escape in Dick Halloran's snowcat, leaving Jack to eventually succumb to his wounds and exposure, dying alone and trying to do that Undertaker thing where he rolls his eyes back into his head, which is honestly pretty embarrassing. Let's not beat around the bush. The Shining is a great movie, and a huge part of why is Jack Nicholson's performance as Jack Torrance. When you use the word iconic to describe a villain, this is the kind of guy you should be talking about. From his mannerisms to his unbelievable line delivery and ad-libs like "Here's Johnny" that have become indelibly part of movie watching culture now, Jack Torrance as a character is simply one of the best villains of all time. His madness is utterly believable, the frictions in his familial relationships are frighteningly relatable, and he does it all by himself, with the Overlook and Kubrick's presentation of it playing more of a passive role unless you're really looking for it. He is, quite simply, one of the greatest movie villains of all time. Thank you for joining us on Bad Guy Breakdowns. If you could consider giving the show a like, that'd be awesome, as it really does help us, and join us again next time as we head into the Matrix to take a look at Hugo Weaving's Agent Smith, the software with a big gun and a sense of self-importance. Until then, I've been Konrad, and I'll see you next time.